Amy Bradley is missing.
28 years since 23-year-old Amy vanished from a cruise ship.
Amy Bradley, she disappeared from a Royal Caribbean cruise ship.
Story of Amy Lynn Bradley, nearly 30 years.
Amy
Bradley.
What happened to Amy Bradley?
Did she inadvertently fall off? Did something nefarious occur where she smuggled off the ship?
This is a story of a vacation that was supposed to last a week and became a disappearance that lasted 28 years. This is Best Day Gone Wrong, the show where dream vacations become nightmares and the trip of a lifetime becomes the day everything falls apart. I'm your host, Jay, and today is the story of Amy Lynn Bradley. And for nearly 3 decades, her family has been trying to answer one question. What happened between the moment someone saw Amy alive and the moment she disappeared? Before Amy Bradley became the center of an international cruise ship mystery, she was just Amy, a daughter, a sister, a recent college graduate, a 23-year-old woman who had just started building a life of her own. She was born in Virginia in 1974 and grew up with her parents, Ron and Eva, and her younger brother Brad, in Chesterfield County, just outside Richmond. And by all accounts, the Bradley family was close, really close. Amy and Brad grew up together. They played sports. They traveled together and spent a lot of time as a family. And Amy in particular was known for being athletic, very athletic. She played multiple sports growing up and eventually became an accomplished basketball player. At Longwood University, the talent took her even further. She played basketball there and earned a degree in physical education. Beyond basketball, Amy was a strong swimmer. She had lifeguard training. She was physically confident and independent. And by the time she graduated, Amy was beginning to move into the next chapter of her life. She had accepted a job with a computer consulting company and had recently moved into her own apartment, where there was another little piece of her future waiting for her, a new English bulldog puppy. Amy had named the puppy Bailey. She was supposed to pick up the dog after returning from the cruise. So think about that for a moment. Amy wasn't running away from her life. She wasn't at some crossroads where everything was falling apart. She just graduated and she had a new job waiting for her, a new apartment, a puppy, a family who loved her, a future that was just beginning to build. And then came the cruise. The vacation was actually something of a gift. Amy's father, Ron, had won a Caribbean cruise through work. So the family decided to make a trip for all 4 of them, Ron, Eva, Brad, and Amy. They flew from Virginia to San Juan, Puerto Rico. And on March 21st, 1998, they boarded Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas. At the time, the ship was still relatively new. It was enormous, modern, and super luxurious. The kind of place designed to make you forget about the outside world. And for the next week, the family would travel through the Caribbean, Aruba, Curacao, Saint Martin, and then back towards Puerto Rico. Sun, ocean, food, music, family. Exactly what a vacation is supposed to be. Not some strange or dangerous expedition, but there is one detail about Amy that makes what happened later especially interesting. According to people who knew her, she wasn't completely comfortable with the idea of being on a cruise. She had expressed some anxiety about being out at sea, and yet she went. And once Amy got onto the ship, she seemed to settle right into the trip. She swam, she explored. She spent time with her family, took photographs, and really tried to enjoy herself. And then came Aruba. On March 23rd, the ship docked in Aruba, and this is where Amy's last full day begins. The family got off of the ship and explored the island. They rented an open-air vehicle and spent the day seeing Aruba. And later, they returned to the Rhapsody of the Seas. That evening, the family dressed up for dinner. They spent time together and they went to a party on the ship. And eventually, Amy and her brother Brad went to the ship's nightclub. There was live music. People were drinking. People were dancing. It was the kind of night you have on a cruise when you know you don't have to be anywhere the next morning. And Amy was having fun. She danced. She socialized. She spent time around members of the ship's band. One of them, who would later become a major figure in theories surrounding Amy's disappearance. But at this moment, none of that mattered. She was simply on vacation. Her brother was there, her parents were nearby, and the next day, they were supposed to explore Curacao. In fact, Amy and Brad had apparently been talking about what they wanted to do there. They had plans, a normal vacation day waiting for them. And eventually, Brad decided he was ready to go to bed. He returned to the family's cabin, and Amy followed shortly afterwards. The ship's electronic lock system recorded her return. It was around 3:40 in the morning. She was back with her family, safe, or at least that's what everyone thought. Brad and Amy spent some time together on the balcony. They talked, and eventually Brad decided he was going to sleep. Before he went inside, he told his sister he loved her. It was an ordinary thing to say, the kind of thing you say to someone without ever imagining that it could be the very last time. Amy stayed outside. The ship continued towards Curacao. The ocean stretched out around them. And sometime after that, the last ordinary night of Amy Bradley's life came to an end. And this is where the story stops being a vacation, because at 5:30 that morning, Ron Bradley opened his eyes. He looked towards the balcony, and there was Amy, sleeping in a chair, still there, still alive, still on the balcony. And then he would go back to sleep. He had no idea that when he woke up again, his daughter would be gone. Think about how strange that is. A person doesn't simply disappear from a cruise ship. There are hallways, cabins, restaurants, elevators, crew members, passengers, security, and yet Amy wasn't anywhere. Her family began looking. At first, perhaps they thought she was somewhere on the ship. Maybe she'd gone for a walk. Maybe she'd met someone. Maybe she'd gone somewhere without telling them. But eventually, the possibility they didn't want to consider became unavoidable. They couldn't find her. And there was something else. Amy's belongings were still there. Her family later reported that she had left behind personal items, including clothing. She hadn't packed a suitcase. She hadn't left a note. And there was no obvious indication that she had planned to leave. And the ship was still moving, which meant investigators were facing an almost impossible question. Where do you search for someone on a moving ship? Because this wasn't a house. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't even a neighborhood. The crime scene, if there was a crime, was traveling. And every minute that passed, the ship was getting farther away. There is one explanation that has always haunted this case. The simplest one. Amy fell overboard. Perhaps she was sitting on the balcony. Perhaps she lost her balance. Perhaps something happened that nobody witnessed, and she went into the ocean. There may have been almost no chance of finding her. That possibility is devastating, but it is also important because there is no confirmed evidence that Amy was kidnapped. There is no body, no verified crime scene, no confirmed perpetrator, no definitive proof that she was ever taken from the ship, which leaves investigators with an enormous unknown. Maybe Amy died that morning. Maybe she didn't. And that uncertainty would become the foundation of everything that followed, because eventually, people began saying something extraordinary. They had seen her. Over the years, people have claimed they saw her. Someone sees a woman who resembles Amy. Someone remembers her photograph. Someone hears about the case and thinks they recognize her. It happens in missing person investigations all the time. At first, these could have been mistaken sightings, but the reports began coming from places that made the family stop and listen. And each time, hope came rushing back, only to be followed by another question. What if it really was her? Because if Amy fell from the ship, she may have died that morning. But if she didn't, then somewhere in the world, there may be a woman waiting for people to find her. And if that's what happened, the mystery isn't simply where Amy went, it's how did she get there? Some said that they saw her in the Caribbean, Curacao. Remember where the ship was heading? Amy's family believes she could have been taken there. And then people began describing a woman that looked like Amy. And one detail made these reports particularly compelling. Amy had several distinctive tattoos: a Tasmanian devil, a sun, a Chinese symbol, a gecko. These weren't simply generic identifying characteristics, they were specific and very recognizable. When someone says they've seen a woman with those same tattoos, you listen. But here's the problem: a sighting isn't proof, and memory isn't proof. A resemblance also isn't proof. So the family kept searching, and then came one of the most disturbing claims in the entire case. Years after Amy disappeared, a U.S. Navy serviceman reported an encounter in Curacao. He said he believed he had seen Amy, not on a beach, not in a hotel, not walking through a tourist area. He claimed he encountered a woman in a brothel who identified herself as Amy. According to his account, she told him she had been forced into prostitution. If true, that changes the entire story, because suddenly the possibility isn't that Amy simply disappeared, it's that she may have been alive somewhere in the Caribbean and unable to leave. But there's a critical problem. The sighting was never conclusively verified. The woman was never recovered, and investigators never established that she actually was Amy. So you're left with something almost more cruel than an answer, a possibility. Because once you've been told your missing daughter might still be alive, how do you stop looking? Years later, another lead appeared: a photograph, a woman. And to Amy's family, the resemblance was striking. They believed the woman pictured could be Amy. The image was connected to a website associated with the sex industry. And once again, the possibility emerged. Could Amy still be alive? Imagine being her parents. For years, you've lived with the possibility that your daughter died. You've tried to accept it. You've tried to keep going. And then someone sends you a photograph. You look at it and you see her face. Maybe you see the eyes. Maybe you see the tattoos. Maybe you see something in the expression that only a parent could recognize. And suddenly, the grief changes, because grief says she's gone, but hope says she's out there. And you don't know which one to believe. The FBI investigated the photograph, but it was never officially confirmed to be Amy. And once again, the family was left with uncertainty. Not an answer, not closure, just another possibility. If Amy was abducted, there was another question: who could have taken her? And there was one person on board who would become impossible to ignore. Attention eventually turned towards a musician named Alistair "Yellow" Douglas, a musician performing aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas during Amy's cruise. Everyone called him Yellow, a nickname that reportedly came from his yellow dyed hair. He was a bassist with the ship's band, Blue Orchid. Blue Orchard? Blue Orchid. And Amy had reportedly interacted with him during the cruise. Not once, not merely in passing. There is a video. Amy was dancing with him inside the ship's nightclub. First, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. People meet other people on cruises all the time. But then investigators began reconstructing Amy's final hours, and suddenly, Yellow became part of the story. According to witnesses, Amy was also seen with Douglas later that night. And this is where the timeline becomes controversial, because some witnesses place Amy with him after the point when her family believed she had returned to the cabin. If those witnesses were correct, then something very important had happened. And perhaps Amy had left the cabin again, and maybe she was with Yellow. But there's a problem. Not everyone agrees on the timeline. And that matters enormously, because if Amy was on the balcony at approximately 5:30 that morning and was simultaneously being seen elsewhere on the ship, then one of those pieces of information has to be wrong. Once Amy was reported missing, Douglas was questioned. Investigators searched his room. They wanted to know, what had he done that night? Where had he been? And whether he knew anything about Amy's disappearance. Douglas voluntarily took a polygraph. The results were inconclusive. That's an important word. Not failed, not proved innocent, inconclusive. The FBI ultimately released him. And crucially, he was never charged in Amy's disappearance. There was no evidence sufficient to prosecute him. Douglas has consistently maintained that he had nothing to do with Amy's disappearance. So why, after all these years, does his name keep coming back? Because of the witnesses, and because of something else, his behavior afterwards. Amy's brother Brad recalled an interaction with Douglas shortly after Amy was reported missing. According to Brad's account, Douglas approached him and expressed sympathy about his sister. That might sound completely normal, except Brad said he found the timing strange because he believed the disappearance had not yet been publicly announced. It created a question. How did Douglas know? Was he simply aware because he was part of the crew and information was spreading? Had someone already told him? Or did he know something because he had been with Amy? There are competing interpretations, and there is no established evidence that Douglas knew anything sinister. But for Amy's family, it was another detail that didn't sit right. Some people began asking whether Douglas could have known more than he said, whether Amy trusted him, whether he had an opportunity, and whether he could somehow have been involved. But here's where we have to slow down. It's very easy to hear this story and think, Yellow did it. But suspicion isn't evidence. Douglas was never charged with Amy's disappearance. He has denied involvement, and the FBI never established that he was responsible. So while his name has become deeply intertwined with theories about Amy, there is no proven connection between him or her disappearance. And that's an important distinction. So perhaps Yellow wasn't a killer. Perhaps he wasn't even involved at all. Perhaps he was simply a musician who happened to dance with a young woman on a cruise and then found himself permanently attached to one of the world's most famous missing person cases. But then another question appears. If he wasn't involved, what explains the conflicting accounts of when Amy was last seen? And that's where this case gets uncomfortable, because the Yellow theory doesn't have to be true for the timeline to still be a problem. And this is where some investigators have gone much further. The theory isn't that Yellow personally murdered Amy. Instead, some believe he could have played another role, a facilitator, someone who knew the ship, someone who knew the passengers, someone who could identify vulnerable people, someone who could potentially make an introduction. The theory connects Yellow to the broader human trafficking hypothesis surrounding Amy, but there's no established evidence proving that Douglas was a trafficker, scout, or facilitator, and no evidence establishing that Amy was even trafficked. Those are theories built around reported sightings. The fact that they are fascinating doesn't make them facts. And honestly, you don't need to make them facts because the uncertainty is much creepier. But just when the case seems cold, comes a witness who says, "I know something." And this is where the story gets especially interesting. The recent Netflix documentary titled Amy Bradley is Missing introduced viewers to people who had rarely spoken publicly about what they remembered that night. One of them was Lori Thompson, who says she saw Amy with Douglas earlier that night. Her account becomes part of the larger question about when Amy was last seen aboard the ship. And that's important because the documentary's filmmakers deliberately went back to the people connected to the original investigation. Not just the family, not just the theories. The witnesses. They wanted to know, what did you actually see? When did you see it? And how certain are you now? Because there is a massive difference between "I think that was Amy" and "I know that was Amy." And after 3 decades, memory can become its own mystery. But there was one interview that changed a lot of opinions. The 2025 documentary actually managed to get something unusual: an interview with Douglas's daughter, Amika. According to the filmmakers, she had never publicly spoken about her father's connection to the case before. And that's fascinating for a completely different reason, because Amy's disappearance didn't just follow the Bradley family for decades, it followed Douglas's family too. His daughter grew up with her father being associated with the disappearance of a young woman. And according to the filmmakers, that association has affected his family for years. That's a side of the story that often gets lost. So you have Amy's family, who has spent 28 years wondering what happened. And then there's this other family who spent decades seeing their father connected to a disappearance he has always denied involvement in. 2 families, 1 mystery, and still no definitive answer. But there are theories, and one of them could be right. So what actually happened? Well, there are several possibilities, all without definitive evidence. Theory 1. Amy could have gone overboard. It's the simplest explanation. Perhaps she was on the balcony and she fell. But there's a problem. If there were no witnesses, spotting a body might be virtually impossible. Theory 2. Another possibility is that Amy somehow left voluntarily. She maybe intended to meet someone. Maybe she intended to start another life. But again, that raises questions. Why leave behind her belongings? Why disappear without telling her family? And why has there never been a confirmed sighting of her afterwards? Theory 3. Then there's the possibility that Amy was taken, maybe from the ship, maybe after reaching Curacao, maybe by someone she knew, or by someone she didn't. This theory is fueled by the reported sightings encountered in Curacao, the photograph, and the family's belief that Amy may have been trafficked. But again, none of that proves what happened. And that's what makes this case so difficult from a conventional murder mystery. There isn't a crime scene that tells us what happened. There isn't a confession. There isn't a body. There isn't even a definitive final moment. There is simply a gap between 5:30 in the morning and the rest of Amy's life. A gap that is controversial and has recently come into question. For years, Amy's story was known primarily within the true crime community, but the recent Netflix series brought the case to an entirely new audience. And there was something significant about the timing, because Amy still hadn't been found. The documentary didn't reveal a definitive answer. It couldn't, because there isn't one. For almost 3 decades, people have been asking the same question: what happened to Amy Bradley? The Netflix documentary heavily emphasizes the possibility of abduction and trafficking. But in 2026, a new investigation asked a different question. What if we've been getting the timeline all wrong? Investigative journalist James Renner spent years looking into Amy's disappearance. On July 28, 2026, he published a book, A Cruise to Nowhere. Renner's book says we may be looking at this completely backwards, and his conclusions are dramatically different from the story many people have come to believe. He argues that Amy may have disappeared around 4:30 in the morning, not 5:30, and that 1 hour changes everything because at 4:30 the ship wasn't where many retellings of the story have placed it. It was farther out at sea, which makes one of the biggest questions in the case even more difficult. How could Amy have gotten off the ship? Renner also visited the people who knew Amy before the cruise, and what they told him painted a more complicated picture of her life, her relationships, her sexuality, and even her plans for the future, her emotional state. And eventually, he reached a conclusion that Amy's family strongly rejects. That perhaps the answer wasn't a kidnapping at all. That perhaps Amy was alone on that balcony. She was drinking. She was struggling with things the public never knew about. And perhaps, in a moment, nobody witnessed she went over the railing. But there's a problem with that theory too, because Amy's family doesn't believe it. They believe she was taken, that the sightings matter, and she may still be alive after leaving that ship. And somewhere between those two possibilities is the truth. The tragedy is we don't know which one. And after 28 years, that may be the most frightening part of all. Because this isn't a story where new evidence and new interviews finally solve the mystery. It's a story where new evidence created another mystery. We tend to think of vacations as having an ending. You fly home, you unpack your suitcase, you scroll through all of your beautiful photographs, you tell your friends about the places you visited, and eventually the vacation becomes a memory. But for Amy Bradley's family, the vacation never ended because somewhere between Aruba and Curacao, their daughter disappeared. This story isn't to make you terrified of cruising, but it is a reminder that the ocean is very different from a hotel. Keep balcony doors secured. Don't climb or sit on railings. Do not sleep on the balcony. And don't approach railings in poor weather conditions. Use a buddy system, especially at night. Keep your cabin doors locked. Do not prop them open, even briefly, and never allow strangers into your cabin. If you see something genuinely concerning, tell the crew. A strange interaction, someone appearing distressed, or an intoxicated person being led somewhere, your report could save someone's life. Never wander into restricted areas, and if someone in your group does go missing, report it immediately. A cruise is supposed to be an escape, but the same things that make a cruise exciting, late nights, alcohol, unfamiliar people, enormous crowds, and open ocean, can also create risks. You don't need to be afraid of them. You just need to remember where you are. For Amy's family, this wasn't a television mystery. It wasn't a Reddit thread or a documentary. It was their daughter, their sister, their family. And every time a new lead appeared, they had to make the decision to have hope again. A sighting, a new theory, a new investigator, always a new possibility. And then sometimes nothing. But when someone disappears, there is no ending. There's only waiting and searching and wondering, what if? And 28 years later, they are still waiting for the one thing every family of a missing person wants, an answer. Maybe Amy died that morning. Maybe she was taken. Maybe she survived. We simply don't know. But there is one thing we do know. Amy Lynn Bradley was 23 years old when she disappeared. She had green eyes, short brown hair, and 4 distinctive tattoos that could still help identify her. And after almost 3 decades, there is still something you can do. The FBI is still seeking information, and the reward remains up to $100,000 for information that helps bring Amy home or identifies those responsible for her disappearance. You can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit a tip online. There is also an anonymous tip line dedicated to Amy, 804-789-4269. That's for Amy. Before we end, we want to extend our deepest condolences to Amy's family and everyone who continues to live with this loss. And until someone can tell us exactly what happened that morning, the story isn't over. This has been Best Day Gone Wrong. Sadly, Amy's case isn't the only dream vacation ended in a mystery. If you think this case is disturbing, you haven't heard what happened on this next Royal Caribbean cruise. Take care, fellow travelers.